Jocelyn.
And I'm Danny.
And welcome to another episode of Why Can't We Talk About It? How's it going, Danny?
I am doing well, although to be more specific, I think I'm feeling a bit mellow today.
Okay.
And more recently, I think I wanted to share something that probably helps to explain why I'm a bit more on the mellow side lately. But before that, I do want to mention, did you know that today here in Toronto, it feels like minus 17?
Ooh, that is unpleasant.
Yeah. Tell me what the weather is like where you are, Jocelyn.
You sure you want to know?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. It's cold here today. I'm saying that in quotation marks. It's 6.
Oh.
That's cold, especially given that a few days ago it was 17 and sunny. But it's cold today for us.
Okay. I just wanted to get that comparison out there. Thanks. So the thing I want to mention was, yes, I feel a bit mellow lately. I feel like usually when you ask that question, I tend to go with that generic, like, oh, I'm good. But given what our podcast is, I want to make a bit more of an effort to try and be a little bit more specific, use different words to explain. However, you know how recently we had published the episode about self-worth and being enough?
Mm-hmm.
And I went on the Instagram page for our podcast, and there was a comment on there, and I believe that's from your mom. So
shout out Lillian.
Yes. So hi, Lillian. Anyways, so I just want to mention was that, so I guess I wasn't expecting to, feel this way. But anyway, she left a really sweet and nice message on Instagram. And she basically was like, Danny, you are more than enough and you deserve all the towels that you want. And I remember when I read that, in that moment, I felt something. I don't know what it was, but I felt it. And I think if I just sat there for a little bit, I'm pretty sure I will shed a tear or two. But I didn't know what it was. And I was like, I need to know what this feeling is. So I sat with it for a little while and I couldn't figure it out. And so I pulled out the feelings wheel. I think we mentioned this before. Feelings wheel, especially for people like me who have a hard time articulating different words of what they feel.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, all right, let me pull this one out. Let me take a look. Let me see what word seems right. And even though I knew it felt like something where it could be a bit emotional, I was like, well, it's not really sad. I didn't feel sad in that moment. Like, I definitely wasn't like angry or any of those. But then the only word left was happy. And I was like, well, I don't know if that counts as happy. But luckily, it does expand into words, I think, more specifically under that. And I just like looking through each word. And then finally, the word that I stopped on that resonated the most was acceptance. And I was like, oh, I think what I'm feeling here is acceptance, which is that your mom, Lillian, her comments made me feel accepted. And that really resonated and hit home, and it felt nice. I'm sure she's going to be listening to this, so I just want to say thank you, Lillian, for putting those words down because I really do appreciate it. It helped me feel accepted. So thank you so much.
F yeah. And that's specifically for you, mommy, because normally it would be an F-bomb. I'm so happy. I think this is a lesson that words matter. And also, if you can take a few seconds to say something nice and meaningful to somebody else, take the opportunity. It costs you nothing, and it will have the other person feeling more than just happy. They could feel accepted. They could feel joyful. They could feel nostalgic. It's just a nice thing to do. So that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that moment, Danny.
Yeah, you're welcome. And how are you doing?
I'm good. I am good. I was telling you that I was feeling pretty full from work. I want to use the word full because there's a lot going on, but it's not necessarily bad. And it's kind of nice. Like I've kind of gotten to a place in my job over the last year or so, I guess, where I have learned how to set good boundaries. I've learned how to say no without feeling guilty. And yeah, it's bled into other areas of my life. And I feel like I'm in a really good place. And weeks like this where I have a lot going on, but I'm still signing off at 5 and making sure I'm taking care of myself first, just makes me realize how different of an approach I have to work and how much I've grown as a person compared to this time even a couple of years ago. Yeah, I'd say I'm feeling content. Maybe that's a good word since we're using more specific words to describe how we're feeling.
Yeah, more specific. Let's get specific. It's good.
Let's get specific.
Yeah.
How about recos? Do you have anything for me this week?
Yeah, I do actually. Given the topic, actually, I'm not sure if it's really related or not, but my reco this week is related to the fact that, so I work in a desk job. So I spend a lot of time at the desk. One of the things that I've been kind of dealing with, especially the last few months, is actually shoulder and neck pain and like soreness. I've been trying to figure out exactly why, because it's always only one side. It's always my right, which I kind of figured out it's actually the hand that I use for the mouse. One thing I've kind of learned recently is that my arm, I'm guessing just like you and most other people who work at a desk, is that when you use your mouse, your arm has to kind of reach much farther out to your right than you should. It's not really good for your shoulder area, your neck area. It's a lot of, I guess, force and tension on it, and it leads to problems. I was trying to figure out, like, how can I fix this? Because that's what I like to do, fix it. And I found that they have different size keyboards out there that if you buy a smaller one, you can place it so that your mouse is actually much more like closer to your body and you don't have to really reach outwards. So I've actually picked one up and I feel better. My shoulders don't feel as sore. It's only been like a week or so, but I've already noticed a difference. I think if I didn't figure that out though, I'm pretty sure my next step would probably be to go see a specialist and be like, hey, what's wrong with me and can you fix it? And I'm pretty sure that they're going to be like, well, this is your problem. We can help you feel a little bit better, but if you don't fix your root cause, you'll still keep hurting and you're still have to keep coming back for who knows how long. And so I brought that up to some people. They didn't know this is a thing. So I just want to share that if you deal with this, by the way, there are keyboards that are smaller. You can be more ergonomic and you can help yourself feel better. How about you?
Thanks for the tip. Ergonomics. Who would have thought?
I don't know. Imagine if you're hurting all the time and it just turns out you got to change a few things here and there. That would be amazing.
Yeah, well, it's a great tip. I think a lot of us out there can relate in some way or another. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So what is your record this week?
It's totally different. My aunt, Angela, hi Angela, she listens too, for Christmas sent some goodies down with my mom. They're called midday squares. Have you heard of them?
I have not.
Midday squares. They are like a healthy chocolate snack. I'm pretty sure they could be in the category of protein bar, but it's not really marketed as a protein bar.
Mm-hmm.
I think it just happens to have like good shit in it.
Okay.
It's oh, Danny's facial expressions. It's a less guilty way of having my daily afternoon coffee break. Like I am the type of person that needs to have, not a coffee actually, I have a tea usually around 3 p.m. I like to have a little something with it, and it's a habit that I've been trying to change because that's not necessarily very healthy. So I would do like 1 square of dark chocolate. That felt too restrictive. And then I was like, let me just do like some fruit or something that's not going to cut it. And so this came at the perfect time. It's like a very healthy, sorry, I shouldn't say that. It's not a very healthy, but it's definitely a more healthy alternative to chowing down on chocolate covered biscuits, which would be like the best case scenario for me. And I found myself reaching for them more. It wasn't like the first day I was like, oh, I guess I'll have this instead, even though I really want a chocolate covered biscuit. And then the second day I was like, ooh, I'm excited to try the other flavor.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that I was like, wow, these hit. I love them. And then I ran out. And they are in Canada only, actually.
Oh.
So enjoy, because I don't have them here. But yeah, if you are like me and you have a bit of a sweet tooth and you're trying to kick the habit, these are a really good alternative. So find some midday squares. I think you can get them on Amazon. You can get them at Whole Foods. Yeah, check them out.
Okay. We'll put a link in. I'm sure we can.
We'll put a link in.
Yeah.
Put a link in.
Put a link in. Nice. That's a good one. I'm always down for food recos.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move right along to the topic that we wanted to talk about today, and that is burnout. Danny and I were chatting before this. Like we've mentioned before, we don't really prepare in advance and write a script between the two of us, but sometimes there's an understanding of like, this is really going to be more of your episode and vice versa. And burnout is something that I could talk about, honestly, probably for an entire podcast series, because I have an intimate relationship with it. I have gone through it 3 times, finally have learned from my experiences. Each time got a little bit better, I would say, to the point where I am now able to recognize the signs of burnout and fix it before it happens. I wanted to share a little bit more about burnout, what the symptoms are, how it can happen, really explain how I felt moment to moment when burnout was happening, and get Danny's take on it as well, because Danny, you're not really sure if you've experienced burnout before, right?
Yeah. So when I think of the word burnout, I mean, even just like a general definition, I'm thinking of somebody who is just overwhelmed, but just overwhelmed doesn't mean burnt out. I have a hard time trying to bridge the difference between someone who's just so overwhelmed to someone who's like, oh, just so burnt out. At the same time, I also wonder about that because in my mind, being burnt out tend to be tied to work. And I almost think of it exclusively for like work and career purposes. And maybe, as you'll explain, maybe you'll let us know or let me know, is it only a work thing? Can it be in other aspects of people's lives? How exactly does it work? And maybe we can take it from there.
Yeah, so I will say that the instances of burnout that I have felt have been work-related and directly caused by work. But as you mentioned, Danny, the word that you used, overwhelm, is a very apt description. And I think that we can feel overwhelmed in any aspect of our life. New moms, for instance, I think can definitely suffer from burnout. It's not just a work-related thing. But for today's episode, since I'm sharing my personal experiences, we, for the most part, are going to talk about it from a work perspective, a corporate perspective.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
So,
let's do it.
I'll start off by reading the Mayo Clinic's definition of burnout. And when I looked on their site, they actually associated it with work too. So they say, job burnout is a special type of work-related stress, a state of physical or emotional exhaustion that also involves a sense of reduced accomplishment and loss of personal identity. So I think that's pretty vague.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to bring up the definition because I think that, like many things with mental health, sometimes a word can become so oversaturated that we kind of burn it out. we kind of overuse it to the point where somebody could have a really long day at work and say, I'm burnt out. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not actually what we talk about when we approach a state of being burnt out. So I was going to read some of the signs out also that I had found when I took a look at this article, but I think what might be a better idea is I'll just talk about my first experience with burnout. So it happened in the job that I had before this, and I didn't realize what I was feeling was called burnout because I was a pretty typical overachiever, a very hard worker. I was the type of person that was okay to go above and beyond to get things done. I felt satisfaction from receiving praise from leadership. I prioritized work. It was something that I thought was worth spending most of my time and energy on. That was my mindset at the time in that job. And I think it's okay to be that type of person if you're in a job that is fair and balanced and you have leadership that is supportive and watches out for you and manages what's on your plate. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, I think, especially in a corporate environment, if you're going to give more of yourself to work, work is going to take it. That's not a lesson that I had learned at that point. And it was, I think, maybe a unique situation where my leader at the time was experiencing some of her own issues. But unfortunately, as a side effect of that, I was taking on more and more of her responsibilities. It happened very slowly, but I started to feel, first of all, it felt unfair. It definitely felt unfair. So that was just a shitty feeling to go through at work. But I really started to feel it in my body. I would get very anxious before work started, and eventually at work, I would still get the job done, although one effect of burnout is you just feel completely unmotivated and sometimes stop working altogether. That unfortunately wasn't me. Sometimes I wish it was, but I'm just not the type of person who can let tasks go. But I was definitely numb when I was performing my work tasks. I felt like it didn't matter. I felt like the simplest tasks were so hard for me to do. It felt like something that I would have done in 10 minutes when I was feeling better, or like even the week before, maybe before the burnout really set in, would take me 10 times longer to do. Like the thought of opening an email that I knew was going to have even a minor request for me, almost, it felt impossible. It felt like such a big ask, like the world was demanding too much from me because I just had nothing left in me to give.
Okay.
I think what a lot of my friends and support system would tell me at the time was, this isn't worth it. You need to quit. You need to find another job. Your work conditions aren't normal. You will be appreciated elsewhere. And I understand totally that they were trying to help me. But when you're burnt out, it's almost like you're in this state where all you can do is just put one foot in front of the other I was trying to talk to my sister-in-law about this. I think there's like a scientific term for, it's just like stasis, or like it's just easy to keep doing the same thing because you've done it so many times before, that when you're burnt out, the thought of doing even one thing differently to improve your situation feels like way too much work. Telling a burnt out person to get another job is like asking them, it's like asking someone who just recovered from breaking both their legs to start training for a marathon.
Mhm.
It's just such a hard thing for that person to envision and try to do. Worse, it made me feel like a victim because they would be trying to offer me these solutions, and because I just couldn't fathom trying to job search or trying to do these things to take care of myself, I felt helpless. And that is such a bad feeling on top of feeling overwhelmed and mentally depleted.
Yeah. Were you basically on autopilot at that point?
Yes. Yes, that's a good description. I was on autopilot to the outside world, but I think autopilot, you think of it as sort of like you're going through the motions, but burnout, it's not really easy to go through the motions. So to the outside world, I think they could tell that I wasn't myself, but at least, I was still getting the work done. I may have looked like I was on autopilot because I wasn't my like usual bubbly, open self at work, but it wasn't actually easy for me to do those tasks. It was way harder than it would have been in my normal state.
Right. Okay. Do you know like how much time would have passed from, I guess my question is like, from when things started getting a bit rough to the point where you're like, this is considered burnt out? Like how much time passes?
I think it's probably different for everybody. And for myself, I don't think it took that long. I think it almost was like a tipping point for me. I was like just barely hanging on. I was feeling stressed and overwhelmed, but probably one thing happened that tipped it over the edge into burnout.
Okay, no, I think for everybody, I can see how that would be different. But I'm just curious too, from your point of view, because I wonder if for some people, if you're listening to like, oh, what is burnt out? How can I apply it to myself? Or just kind of figure like, like what I'm asking for me, it's like, oh, did I go through that? Like as you're talking too, I'm kind of thinking about like my own experiences, and I'm kind of like, okay, does this apply? Does this make sense? And I guess for me, it's just, oh, like, can I escalate so quickly, or is it something where it tends to take time to get to that point? I guess that's the reason why I was asking.
Are you also sort of wondering like what were the signs, and like could I have maybe recognized it before we got there?
I mean, a little bit in terms of, I mean, like I would imagine like when it's happening, like you're not aware of that, or like you said, if you're not aware of the term, you won't even know it's happening to you. It's only more in hindsight, you're like, yes, that's definitely what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as I'm listening to you, I am kind of looking for signs where I go, does that apply? Does that work for me? Oh, will that fit the criteria for me to say, oh, yes, that was burnt out for me? I guess that's why I'm asking.
Okay. Well, I think I will explain what I now recognize as the signs, but I do also want to say, I kind of want to like put an end to that story and talk about how I got out of it and how there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Because if there's anybody listening who's like, oh yeah, I'm burnt out right now, I don't want you to think, you are a victim and nobody's going to be able to say anything to help you. You're on your own, because that's not the case. I will say that one thing I wish I had done, and advice that my dad gave me, was to take a leave. I think I was too scared to do that because at that point, work was my identity and I was gunning to get a promotion. I was in that part of my life where like my title mattered so much to me. What my salary was mattered so much to me. And I was afraid that if I took a leave, it was going to reflect badly on me. But I think that I would have recovered a lot better if I had done that. I know several people actually who have taken leaves and come back and things are better for them. So I just want to put that out there. If there's anybody who was like me, which by the way, we should talk about that because work shouldn't be your identity. That's so dangerous when you're on that path. If you are, for any reason, scared to take a little bit of time off work to take care of yourself, please don't be. It's so important to put yourself first. So if that option is available to anybody who's burnt out, I suggest exploring that option. But I know that that can be hard, even looking into it, even looking into what are the logistics. It's difficult. So I empathize, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, the only thing that really helped, because I didn't take time to step away, and I think removing yourself from the situation and changing your mindset is the only thing that is going to help you. And I don't mean like turn that frown upside down and what's the silver lining of this? That's not what I mean at all. But for me, what it took was looking at my current situation and thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I letting this job make me feel this shit about my own life?
Yeah.
How did we get here? And it took, this is why I think stepping away would have given me that clarity so much sooner. But I had to ask myself, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if I stop doing X, Y, and Z? What's the worst thing that's going to happen if I make my needs known and advocate for myself at work? What's the worst thing that's going to happen? And when I looked at it from that point of view and thought about it and realized I am a high performer. If I raise my hand and say no to a few things or even open up about how I'm feeling right now, they're not going to fire me. And if they do, it's not a place that I want to work anyway. And it took some time for that mindset to set in. But when I realized how much more important it was to prioritize other parts of my life and other things, it gradually got better. It was very gradual. It wasn't all at once, but things started to look up for me. I want to mention that in the thick of my burnout, the rest of my life fell apart too. Like I had nothing left of myself to give in other places in my life, so they suffered. My relationship was hard. I felt guilty when I was hanging out with my friends because if I was honest, then they would try to be helpful. And if they tried to be helpful, I would just honestly feel like they didn't get it. And it was really hard. I really am grateful for them for sticking by me and listening to me complain that year. It was rough. But I also just like let the rest of my life pass me by. Like I canceled on so many things. I just didn't feel up to it. My girlfriend, Janet, understood how I felt and I think was really trying to make me feel better and give me things to look forward to and tried to convince me to go to Tay-Tay's Reputation tour.
Oh.
And I didn't.
Oh.
And honestly, top 5 regrets of my life. Her Reputation era, my favorite era. And I missed out on it because I felt nothing. I felt so depleted of joy. And work caused that for me. So it was so hard and I really had to shift. I did it with the help of my friends and my family and therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for you to miss out on the concert, that's...
Oh, God. Don't remind me. Sometimes when you're like lying awake at night and you're like, oh, let me just relive like this super embarrassing moment or this super awful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was that, That's tough.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like, yeah, that's a difficult one because I'm thinking about how like, oh, you have people in your life who, are trying to do something to help you. In an odd way, it's not necessarily always helpful in that position. And it's almost like, what do you do? Especially like for you. And then there's like your family and friends. Like if I imagine if that was me at the time, I'd be like, I'm not really sure what to do to help Jocelyn. I can see something's going on, but I'm like, I don't really know what to do. And the fact that me trying to do something wouldn't even be helping, I think it would just make things even more challenging. Like, what? It's not even working? What am I doing now? What else can I do? I think it's good that you also mentioned that part, because I think for me, almost like as a default reflex, if I see someone that I perceive as maybe struggling or needs help, I'm like, I want to do something, but not really cross my mind that maybe it's not the best thing to do, or that it may not actually be helpful to them.
Well, I would say that if you know somebody going through burnout and you want to help them, be a listening friend. And you could say, I know what you're going through. I think I have an idea of what that might feel like. And you might feel like this situation is hopeless right now, and there's nothing that either of us can do to fix it. And if that's the way you feel, that's okay. Just know that I support you. And if you want to vent, I'm here to listen. And just open up a space for them if you have the capacity to take what they're going to give, without trying to fix it or without trying to empower them to fix it. Because if they're not there yet and not ready for it, then it'll backfire.
Oh yeah, that's great advice, because I think as a default, like I said too, is like, I want to fix it.
Yeah, that's a good intention.
Yeah, the intention is there, but I think for me, it's like, oh, I can open up and expand my skill set to be like, hey, it's not always about fixing. It's just, as you said, have a listening ear, just be there for them. And that may be enough for that situation.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So the second time I experienced burnout was kind of similar in a way, where I had started a new job and it was a much harder job, like 1,000 bajillion% harder. Danny's like nodding vigorously because he would show up and like hug me while I cried at work. It was bad. It was bad. But again, I was still in that sort of like, my work is my identity. Having this title is important to me. I'm new and I need to prove myself. Like, I will bend over backwards and then do it again because I need to keep this job. That need would be my response when Azim or when I had family members approach me and say, this is not normal. Just for any work environment, this is way too much. It's not sustainable. You can't keep doing this. And I would say, I have to. That's how I phrased it. I have to. Like, I didn't have a choice. Like, I put myself in a position where I didn't have a choice. Again, what helped me was changing my mindset and having a very open and honest conversation with my manager. And my manager, very fortunately, was extremely receptive and was actually also experiencing something similar. So I think by opening up about that, it actually kind of helped the situation for both of us, because they were then able to raise that issue, which was a resourcing issue. Like, there just wasn't enough people to get the amount of work done. And the issue was raised, and I immediately had my workload lightened. So this round of burnout did not last as long, and I was able to recognize the signs, having already gone through it the first time. And so I applied the tools that I had learned the first time around changing my mindset and advocating for myself. Still did not take a leave. Yeah, it did help. And then the last time I got burnout, I'd say was the quickest. It didn't last that long. And I actually, it was pandemic related. I think it was really like, I think we were all a little burnt out, right?
Yeah.
Like the shift to working from home and like understanding that. So that burnout was actually very easy for me to address and bring up, because we were talking about burnout a lot more openly after the height of lockdowns and working from home. And, compared to many, I had it very easy. Like, I didn't have to be a teacher to my child and try to do a bajillion different things. So comparatively, I was in a good spot, but oh my gosh, there was definitely an adjustment period for my workload in the pandemic, but it was pretty easy to address given that I already had the tools and I recognized the feelings in my body, that anxious feeling, that feeling of not being motivated, the feeling of nothing matters, the feeling of I'm stuck in my situation. It would be the same phrases that I would tell myself over and over again. By then, I'd also done CBT, which I've talked about before and how much I love it. And one of the tools you learn in CBT is to ask yourself if the things that you're telling yourself are factual or not. When I realized that I was ruminating, which is also something I do when I'm depressed, and I was able to hit back at those beliefs like, I am stuck. Well, that's not actually true. When I was able to really coach myself out of the situation, it helped so much. Now, a year or two out from feeling that way, I think that there have been several times where I could have approached burnout. It's just taken a lot of work of me being very vigilant of knowing what my capacity is like, understanding that if I have to do X number of projects, my brain's going to feel too scattered and I'm not going to be able to give my best work and I'm going to start to feel burnt out. Or if I'm getting to the point where I'm missing my lunch hour more than once or twice a week, that's not good for my mental health. Like, there are all these signs that I start to recognize when I know that if that pattern continues, I'm going to be burnt out. And I just have become very strict with my boundaries and also voicing them. I don't want to be annoying about it at work, but I talk about the importance of setting down boundaries. I talk about workload capacity when I get emails late at night. I call out the person who sent them.
Oh, nice. Okay.
There are things we can do to change the culture, but if you're not comfortable doing that, at least start to get comfortable with taking care of yourself first.
I imagine there definitely is a culture component to that, which, I don't think we're going to get into it much here, but it starts with the work, right? Like if the company, the work culture, the environment, that's the norm, and then you have people being placed into it, and it's like, well, this is how it is, you got to deal with it, then I think most people will just suffer in silence on their own because there's something in there that says, well, this is the way it's supposed to be, so it's too bad. And then you just kind of suffer, and I imagine that's when burnout is even more prevalent of an issue.
Or you think everybody else is handling it. Everybody else around here seems to be able to do it.
Yeah, where you just think, well, if I say something, then I'm going to be the odd one out because look at everyone. Everyone's, head down, working away.
Hustling, grinding.
Yeah. But it turns out probably everyone's suffering too. Which actually is more sad now that I think about it that way. It's like, oh, everyone's suffering together, but on their own at the same time. That's very interesting, the 3 examples that you gave regarding burnout. Now, I want to ask, I don't think you'll be able to really know the answer to this, but I'm maybe more of a thought exercise. But from what I know, when you had your first burnout, that's probably around a time when you started therapy as well, within that same time period. Okay. Do you think if you were somebody who was already going to therapy in general prior to that, and then you met these work situations, that it may have been a bit different because you would have already been working on different aspects of like the things you talked about that got you through, like boundaries and recognizing signs and symptoms? Or do you think burnout would have been so foreign that it probably still would have caught you off guard anyways?
I'm not sure. I think it depends what I would have gone to therapy for in the first place before this had happened. I think therapy does a great job of teaching us the tools to take care of ourselves, and a lot of the tools that you need to take care of yourself so that burnout doesn't happen are applicable to many other parts of our lives, right? It's essentially at the end of the day learning how to take care of ourselves, right? It's essentially learning how we operate, why we do the things we do, and how to take care of ourselves in life. And burnout is just part of that. So maybe the tools that I would have learned would have been applicable, and I may not have approached burnout in the first place, but it's hard to say. It's hard to say without having done that. I actually didn't go to therapy for burnout. I went to therapy because of the very unique and unfortunate situation that had occurred in the workplace. After learning about things like gaslighting and some of those other terms, my therapist explained, based off of what you're telling me, what you've taken on, how you're feeling at work, what you're going through is burnout. And here's what we can do to fix it.
So there was one piece of, I think you're saying it during your second example, which was when those things were happening, you said like, oh, Azim, your family were saying like, oh, this is not normal. I think for you, it was like, but this is what I gotta do. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. Have you thought about what the other side of that would have meant? What I'm trying to get at really is there a shame component, do you think, for you, where it's like, well, if I was to acknowledge that this is not normal and to stop, is there a part of it that goes, then I'm kind of saying that I can't do this? And you either would feel ashamed about it or feel guilty about it, because it's like, for you, it's like, if I'm somebody who's works hard and if I can't handle this task, then that means I'm admitting that maybe I'm not this narrative of a person who I thought I was.
That's a very good observation. So this is something that happened during that second wave of burnout where, I had achieved the title. I got there.
Yeah.
This is what I was working towards, and I had to stay there. There was an element of it that if I walked away from the situation, I would be not living up to the expectations that had been put on me. And I'll give you a couple examples. So my dad was very successful in his career and climbed the corporate ladder. And I kind of felt like I needed to do the same thing. And he would say things like, as a form of encouragement only, he'd say things like, oh, you're going to be their boss one day, or you're so capable to be a VP. And he'd say these things and it would make me feel like, okay, this is what I have to do. And I had to talk to him about it. And he was very receptive and told me, if you quit and decided to do basket weaving for the rest of your life, I would still love you and it wouldn't change how I feel about you. And I think I just needed to hear that from him.
Mm-hmm.
I think I needed to have that release of not feeling like I needed to live up to those expectations. Another thing was that my apo and akong, my grandparents, my Asian grandparents, who immigrated here and worked their tails off their whole life to give us a better life. Very classic immigrant story. When I would say things like, oh, work's so busy, like I would call them and tell them work's so busy, my apo would say things like, it's okay, it's good to be busy. Being busy is better than, not being busy, not having work. Your work is good. Like she would say things like that. And then I would honestly feel terrible about it because they worked so hard. My grandparents worked so hard. And I just felt like I was letting them down. And I told my mom actually talked to her about it. And honestly, Danny, it was like a light switch. Anytime after I'd call, oh my gosh, I'm getting a little bit emotional, but she would be like, you're not working too hard, are you? Oh. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. I want to make sure you're happy first. Yeah. And she always checks in to make sure I'm not working too hard. And that's not always easy, especially for an Asian grandparent to understand that and to get it
So quickly too.
so quickly. Oh, I was so touched, and it matters so much to me that like even to this day where, I'm good. Like I feel very good about my approach to work now. She still checks in and makes sure I'm not working too hard, makes sure I'm eating my lunch. Like it's very sweet. So yeah, that's a good observation. There's definitely a component of I don't know if it's shame. Probably at the end of the day it is, because aren't all of our issues we go to therapy about shame? Yeah. But it was those expectations from others that I needed to work through to make it okay for me to take care of myself.
Yeah. I asked that too because I think as I'm listening to your stories, I'm trying to formulate whether or not like my example counts. I have a feeling it does, but obviously without me knowing what it was at the time. I'll just tell you what that was like. So
yeah, I want to hear it.
Yeah. So for me, the example that I can think of is, I think I'm going back like 2014. I had just, I guess it's a similar role that I was doing before, but it was for a team where I think they work with clients who basically have more money. I guess for me going in, I didn't really know fully, I think, what I was going to be getting into, because I think it just was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. I guess I had an expectation of what it would be like. And even though I already gave myself an expectation that it would be very challenging, very tough, it actually turned out to be much more. And I remember the time period, and this is why I asked for about yours too, is I knew it was exactly 4 months. It was 4 months of staying longer than I normally would have for work. I'd be going home, eating dinner, going to bed, and then basically thinking about work, and then waking up thinking about work, going to work. It would always feel a little bit anxiety inducing. I would feel overwhelmed. I wasn't having any lunches, and I would just kind of work through it. And only if I was like really hungry, which would be like 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm like, fine, I'll get some food because it's too much. But I'll be doing that habitually and very consistently until to the point where I remember on the 4-month mark, I remember thinking to myself, I think I need to quit. I think I need to just quit and do something else, anything else. Or I was like, do I have employment insurance? Like, will I be okay? Like, will I still have some money? But it was those kind of thoughts that was happening. And it took about 4 months of me being like, no, I can do it. I'm just going to, this is just like something that will pass. It's a phase. I'm just trying to figure it out, and it's new to me. So this is why this is all happening. However, when I started thinking about, I think maybe I need to quit. Then those thoughts of, but what am I going to tell people? What am I going to say? Like, this job was too tough. I quit. I'm a quitter now. I was like, I don't want that. What will people think of me? Right. And it was a team of, I think, 40, 50 people too. And even though I knew people were also sometimes struggling or overwhelmed or just like running around, they're trying to get things done. And even if I saw like there was, I think 1 or 2 people who like consistently stayed until like 9 p.m. every day. And I would go home, and then when I come back in the morning, they're still there already. I would go, well, these people are doing it, right? I'm like, well, they're doing it too. So I can't quit, right? Like, I'll be like the laughing stock of this team or something along those lines. And I think that was the shame component where I go, man, I'm going to be so ashamed if I actually quit. And so even with all those things, and I'm sure they all played a big part, I did not quit. And I think I just kind of like pushed through for a while until eventually it got to a point where I was like, okay, I think I just kind of got a better handle on what to do. And it became easier over time. And then I stuck it out. And I ended up being in that role, I think, for about 3 years before I was like, this actually is too much. I really should leave. But I was leaving because I was like, I think I'm just done with this. Not because it was too much all the time. But I remember, I was like, that was the only time I think where I was like, I actually thought like, this is way too much. It's consuming me. I need to actually quit this place and go somewhere else. And I guess looking back, given their topic, I'm like, maybe I was burnt out. Maybe that's what I was.
Yeah.
If that's what I thought about pretty much all the time. And I would lose sleep sometimes because I'm thinking about the thing that happened today and I know I'm going to deal with it tomorrow. Like those kinds of things. But I think at the time, I was just like, this is just a very difficult job. It didn't occur to me that it has a name for it or that I was going through it. And because no one ever else, at least that I can remember, fully outright said like, hey, this is a lot and it's too much for all of us. Everyone just kind of kept going. So I was like, okay, maybe it's just me. But now I'm thinking, I think more people were saying that too. Maybe, I don't know if anything would change, but I think it would be more like, oh, okay, we're in this together. But I think some people did make it seem much easier than I think it really was. Those components, though, those elements, I'm like, I think they're there. Your story and my story, while different, some components are, I think, similar enough where I feel fairly confident where I can go, oh, I think I was burnt out at that point too.
This is why Gen Z is going to save us, because their attitude to work, I'm generalizing here. I'm just going off of TikTok stereotypes and conversations with my intern, but their attitude is like staying till 9 and then back again, working for free. How embarrassing. Or not eating and then going and getting something unhealthy that's going to be bad for your body. How embarrassing for you. Yes, it is embarrassing. It is embarrassing, okay? It's embarrassing to make your identity work and sell yourself out to climb that corporate ladder. Who is that? Don't know her. Mm-hmm. That's not me. Not anymore. So I'm taking a little bit of that attitude into my life going forward. But yes, I think you were burnt out, Danny, and thank you for sharing, because I think a lot of people can relate to that. And one thing I want to end on is for people who are burnt out and they are in a position where they really are more stuck than what the corporate environment allows for. I'm talking essential workers, healthcare workers, people who they are feeling the brunt of burnout in a post-pandemic world. Burnout can so easily lead to depression and other mental health issues. My first round of burnout led to a very bad cycle of depression, and I was in an extremely dark place. What I want to say to anybody who's in that position is that you aren't alone and there is help out there, and I would urge you to seek advice from a professional. And if that's not available to you, then to confide in somebody you trust and let them know that you're not looking for a savior. You're looking for someone to share the burden and just listen. Just having one person out there that will listen so that you know you're not alone can make a world of difference. That's where I wanted to end, because I know I've shared my experiences and, you know, I said that what helped me was shifting my mindset and therapy and taking a leave if that's available. But those are not easy things that everybody can do. And I just want to acknowledge that. It's never worth letting burnout turn into something more serious. So for anybody who is feeling that terrible and wretched, I just want them to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for acknowledging that part. I just want to second that with like, yeah, for me to say like, yes, even at that time, for me to say like, I can quit and I'll probably be okay, probably made it easier to think that way. But I understand that, yeah, there's a lot of people out there who that's not actually an option. So thank you for bringing that up and just making that point, because it is important. Not everybody has the access and the privilege. We got to do, what we can in those situations. So, but we got to do something. I think that's the important part, because I know for me, all the things I said, just now as my example, I actually kept that all to myself. So let people know. I think we can help each other more than we give credit for.
Exactly. Okay. Well, I think this is a good place to wrap it up.
I agree. Let's wrap it up.
thanks for the chat.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for listeners. And we'll have a new episode for you guys next time. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.